Hi there, crafty friends. Welcome and thank you for joining me. My name is Melissa, and today I thought we would make a card and a wax seal. For the card, we are using Pink Fresh Studios Poinsettia frame, and we are going to make this almost identical to what it is in the picture on the back, except we are going to try to do a white poinsettia. And I have the stencil, the die, and the hot foil plate. I did not purchase the stamp set because everything I wanted was in the hot foil plate set. So I've got my hot foil plate warming up on the side. This is a 7-piece stencil set, but we are only going to use 5 of the stencils. We are using black glimmer foil. I've got my plate warming up. My timer has gone off. I pulled that base plate out of there. I'm just centering that sentiment inside the image so I can do everything all at once. I'm going to add my black foil, my cardstock, and then my plates. I will run this through my die cutting machine, and then we can see what we got. This is always my favorite part. And that came out beautifully. So now we can go ahead and move on to stenciling. And this does line up pretty well. I'm going to use a couple pieces of tape. Let's get our first stencil on there. That looks pretty good. And we will be using olive and evergreen for our greenery. We are going to start with olive. And I want this to be pretty dark. So we are going to go pretty heavy-handed. And we're just going to blend in all of our leaves. And you need to do little swirls so you can make sure that you get in all those nooks and crannies. I think we've got pretty good coverage there. And as you can see, I did go pretty dark. And I'm just going along the edges now, the base of the leaves, just trying to make it a little darker for a little bit more accent. So let's see what we got here. I'm going to wipe this off gently. And that looks beautiful. So now we can go ahead and move on to stencil number 2. And stencil number 2 is the accent on our greenery. And for that, we will use evergreen. That looks good. We can tape that down. And then add our evergreen. And that really is a much darker green. You can tell the difference as you ink blend on there. We just want to get all those areas covered. And just like that, we are all done with our evergreen. It really didn't take that long at all. I know I cut most of it out, but it did not take that long at all. Oops, I forgot one here. Just kind of rotate your brush in swirl motion so you can get all those little areas. So let's see what we got. Again, I'm just going to wipe a little bit of that ink off of that stencil. We can pull that back, and that looks beautiful. And that ink will lighten as it dries. It will blend and it will lighten. I'm going to clean my stencil here real quick. So now we are going to move on to stencil number 3. And this is the main portion of our flowers. That is all lined up. And for our flowers, we are going to bring in Misty Coast. And I am using one of my great big blending brushes because I want this to be really light. So I don't want it too heavy. We're going to get a nice coating of ink on that brush, tap off, and then just lightly color in those flowers. Just really lightly. And if we think it's not dark enough, you can peek. You can lift that up and take a little peek, and we do need it a little bit darker. Just a little bit, not a whole lot. I think that's probably pretty good. And then I lost my other blending brush. And then for the little berries, we are going to do those solid. So for our berries, we are just going to make those dark gray. Well, as dark as Misty Coast will allow. And just fill all those in. And then we can see what we have. And that is looking really pretty. So let's move on to stencil number 4 already. And for stencil number 4, we are going to use Citron. And we're going to do this very, very lightly. I'm going to tap off on a piece of scrap paper, or we can tap off on our stencil. And let's do our berries also. We're going to do our berries darker. So some of them will be gray and some of them will be citron. And that citron does lighten up. So we're going to go really, really light here. I don't want this to be dark at all. In fact, that actually looks a little bit darker than I want it. So I'm going to stop on that other flower. And just try to keep it really light. I think that's good. Let's see what we got. And that is looking pretty. Actually, you know what? I think that's as far as we're going to go. Let me look at my stencils. That was we need number 5. We do need number 5. So we can do the centers of our berries and flowers. It's all lined up. Tape it down. And use our citron again. And we will do the centers of the flowers and some of the berries. Just like that. So that was stencil number 5. If we were to move on to stencil number 6, all that is going to do is add just a little bit more into the center of that flower, but I don't think we need that. So I am not going to use it. And then if we were to have used stencil number 7, what that does is that allows you to ink blend on the background. So you have a background color, but I just want mine white. So we're just going to leave it as is. We need to bring out our die and cut out our image. We'll tape that down so it stays in place. And then die cut. And that will just pop right out. There we have our image. And now we can also die cut our sentiment. And there is just enough room to get that die in there and cut that out perfectly. Isn't that pretty? That came out so pretty. I just love that. So now I'm going to go ahead and get foam tape behind everything. I've got all my foam tape on the back of my image here. And because this is a tricky one, when this panel cuts out, it is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. and it can be a little hard to get that lined up. I brought in my Misty. I've got my panel already in there, and I'm just going to place this along the edge so I can be sure that my image is lined up on that panel perfectly. I love using my Misty for that, just to get everything all lined up. So now we can bring our blender brush back in, and I am not going to add any ink to that Citron blending brush, but I do want to add a little bit of color just where our sentiment is going to go, just for a little more dimension. And we can do that just like that. Then let's bring in our T ruler so we can add our sentiment and have that be nice and straight. And there's two ways you can do this. You can have your sentiment more on the left, or you can have it more on the right. I kind of like it more on the right. So let's get that lined up. I think that looks good. Get that pressed down. Now all we need to do is add our embellishments. For my embellishments on this one, I am using the Clear Drops in Leaf. Isn't that pretty? I've got my gems on there. I added it to a card base, and now we can move on to our wax seal. So for my wax seal, we are going to do our white wax first. So let's get that in there. And it's pretty simple. It's just a little bit time consuming. So our wax is getting melted. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Please be sure to give me a thumbs up and leave a comment. I will have everything listed and linked in the description below. And this wax seal, my fingers are all inky still, they're green. For this wax seal, I believe I got this as a freebie from Strictly Rita, but I will link to her shop in the description below also. And it looks like I have a little bit of wax in there, but I don't think it will matter. So our white is almost warm enough, and I will show you. I did a little sample, and on my sample I used more of an iridescent white for my poinsettia, and I didn't care for that, so we're going with a solid white for our wax seal here. And I think it's almost warm enough. Once it starts to bubble is when you know that it's warm enough. So let's pour a little bit on there. We don't need a whole lot. Let's put our seal on there and let that cool. And because we are doing 3 colors, we are going to do 3 steps. So as soon as this is cool, we are going to take our X-Acto knife and we are going to trim out the poinsettia. I think that's good. So now let's get that trimmed out. And what I like to do is I like to just take my scissors. It makes it a little easier to just trim off that excess before you trim out the flower. And then I will just put all the excess back in my spoon and let that melt. So I'm just going to take my X-Acto knife here and very carefully, I need to get my head in there, and very carefully just trim out the poinsettia leaves. And it's really simple. Just drop that wax back in there and just trim out those leaves. You could do it with scissors, but I found it was so much easier to just use an X-Acto knife. So just be really, really careful. So I got my flower all trimmed out and I put it back in my seal. I've got my green melting, And I've got my white that I dumped out and am letting cool so I can save it for another seal later. I'm just going to stir my green here. I think that's just about ready. We're going to put that down and try not to get any ashes in there. Then we can put our seal in with our flower and let that dry. I think that is cooled. Ooh, that's going to be pretty. So now we can lift this up and we can trim out the green leaves. And again, I like to just go around and trim off the larger pieces. I will put those in my spoon and melt them so I can save that for later. I'm going to do the same thing, and I am just going to take my X-Acto knife very carefully. I got dirty this time, my goodness. Very carefully, and trim out the whole image. I hope I'm not getting my head in there. Just like that. We're just going to trim the leaves and the flower out. Just like that. And put that extra wax in there so we can save it for next time. And it does cut really easily. Just be super careful. And my knife keeps coming loose for some reason. I'm not sure why. So then I'm just going to come back in and do a little trimming of any excess that I see on there that shouldn't be there. I've got my poinsettia and the leaves all trimmed out. My wax is melting. I'm trying to make a different color. For my test seal, I didn't care for the background. It was just a little bit too green. So hopefully this one looks a little bit better. I think we are ready. Let's get this on our seal. And we're just going to find where that goes and hold that down. Just give it a little press so it stays in place. Then we can take our wax. I think that's good. That might be a little bit too much. We're going to push that in there. Actually, not even push. We're just going to rest it in there. Then we can dump this color out and save it for another day. And I just like to wipe my spoon out nice and clean with a paper towel. So that has cooled for about 5 minutes. Let's look and see what we got here. And I think that came out beautifully. I love that. And it matches our card. Isn't that pretty? I feel like I made such a huge mess today. Just dropped something on the floor. And that seal goes beautifully with our card. I think that came out so pretty. Please be sure to give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment. I will see you next time, and thank you so much for spending time with me. Bye-bye.